Most of us rush to the store the moment a storm warning hits. Shelves go empty. People panic, and everything suddenly feels like the sky is falling. But for Native Americans, survival was not a last-minute scramble. It was a system, a science, and a way of life. Long before refrigerators, plastic packaging, or expiration dates, they created at least 7 foods that simply refused to spoil. Not for a season, not for a year, but sometimes for decades. These weren't just emergency snacks. They were power sources, travel fuel, winter lifelines built with knowledge modern survivalists still struggle to match. So today, we are stepping back in time to uncover the 7 foods that never expired and the wisdom that kept entire nations alive. Across the Great Plains and the dry Southwest Native American communities lived in landscapes that could turn harsh in the blink of an eye. No refrigerators, no chemicals, no modern storage warehouses, just raw nature and the knowledge handed down through generations. Yet they built food systems so clever, so resilient, that modern science still tips its hat. These methods kept families alive through brutal winters and journeys that stretched for hundreds of miles. And now, we are about to see exactly what they stocked away. Our journey starts with a food so powerful, so dependable, that many consider it the first true energy bar in human history. Pemmican, a simple mixture of dried meat, rendered fat, and sometimes berries, yet it fueled warriors, hunters, and entire migrations. No fancy ingredients, no shortcuts, just pure survival science shaped by the land. The process was straightforward but exact. Hunters sliced lean meat into thin strips and dried it until it was hard as wood. Then the meat was pounded into a fine powder. At the same time, fat from the same animal was melted down until it turned liquid and clear. When the meat powder met the hot fat, the mixture came together into a dense, heavy block. Sometimes berries were added for flavor and extra nutrients. But the real secret, the heart of pemmican, was the balance. Too little fat, and it crumbled. Too much fat, and it spoiled. Get the ratio just right, and you had a food that could outlast storms, seasons, and sometimes even generations. Why did it last so long? Imagine removing every drop of water from the meat. Bacteria need moisture to live, and in pemmican, there simply wasn't any left. Then picture each particle sealed inside a shell of purified fat. Oxygen had nowhere to go, and without oxygen, spoilage slowed to almost nothing. It was like nature's vacuum packing long before anyone invented the term. For travelers who covered miles of open plains, 1 pound of pemmican could power an entire day. Modern protein bars might taste sweet, but when it comes to real endurance, they don't even make the short list. Pemmican was the original superfood, built not for convenience, but for survival. And it never backed down. Next on our journey is a food so tough you could mistake it for prairie stones, dried corn kernels. To Native communities, these tiny golden beads were more than a harvest. They were survival gold carried across generations and across great distances. Corn wasn't just food, it was insurance. The process began long before winter arrived. Corn had to be harvested at the exact moment of maturity. Too early, and it spoiled. Too late, and it cracked. Once picked, the ears were laid out in the sun or hung where steady winds could reach them. Over several days, the kernels shrank and hardened until they were truly rock solid. When drying was complete, the kernels were removed and stored in sealed clay jars or buried in cool underground pits lined with bark and stone. Why did they last so long? Moisture is the enemy of every grain, and dried corn kept its level below 14%. Below that threshold, bacteria and mold simply cannot grow. And the beauty of dried corn wasn't only durability, it was versatility. Ground into meal for bread, boiled for soup, heated over fire to pop into a crunchy snack. One ingredient, many uses, no refrigeration needed. For people facing long winters or journeys of hundreds of miles, dried corn wasn't optional. It was a lifeline, and while we worry about cereal expiring in a few months, these kernels have probably been laughing for generations. Tough as stone, light as air, able to last for years, even decades when stored well. If dried corn was survival gold, then nixtamalized corn was pure genius. A biochemical breakthrough created long before anyone understood the science behind it. Hominy wasn't luck. It was the result of careful observation and a deep connection to the land. The process began with a simple idea: cook dried corn in an alkaline solution made from hardwood ash. That solution loosened the tough outer hull that made raw corn nearly impossible to digest. As the kernels simmered, the shell dissolved, the texture softened, and the niacin locked inside the grain was released. People didn't know the word niacin, but they knew the effects. Better health, easier digestion, stronger communities. After cooking, the corn was rinsed repeatedly until the ash flavor disappeared. What remained were soft, pale kernels that could be eaten dried again for storage or ground into a smooth dough. And unlike untreated corn, nixtamalized corn lasted far longer. The alkaline process reduced spoilage, eliminated harmful microbes, and transformed corn into a stable, nourishing food source. The advantages were clear: more nutrients, better flavor, greater longevity, and most importantly, protection from diseases that devastated populations who ate untreated corn elsewhere. While whole regions later struggled with pellagra, Native Americans had unknowingly solved the problem centuries earlier. Hominy wasn't just food. It was scientific brilliance born from fire ash and ancestral wisdom. If there was ever a food that carried an entire community, it was dried beans. These weren't side dishes. They were the protein vault of Native American life, feeding families through winter, cold summer drought, and long journeys across the plains. In some villages, the same stock of beans lasted from one generation to the next. That is how dependable they were. The process seemed simple, but precision mattered. Beans were harvested at full maturity when the pods rattled in the wind like tiny drums. Then they were spread under the sun to lose every bit of moisture they could. Some tribes even toasted them lightly over low heat to drive out the last traces of dampness. Once perfectly hardened, the beans were stored in clay jars, pine pitch-lined baskets, or underground pits that stayed cool and dry year-round. The tools changed with the land, but the wisdom behind them stayed the same. The benefits were remarkable. Dried beans resisted rot, stayed edible for years, and delivered long-lasting nutrition. Paired with corn, they formed a complete protein with all essential amino acids needed for survival. Nature's chemistry perfected long before textbooks explained it. Today, protein powders expire in a couple of years, but dried beans kept entire nations strong for decades. Reliable, versatile, able to endure for years, even decades, in the right conditions. A humble food with a legacy far greater than its size. If Pemmican was the powerhouse, then Jerky was the workhorse. Lean, tough, and built to endure, Jerky became one of the most trusted foods in the Native American world. This was meat that didn't just survive the elements, it challenged them. Strips as tough as hide, yet rich enough to keep hunters moving all day long. The process started with the leanest cuts of meat, trimmed meticulously to remove every trace of fat. Fat was the enemy. Any left behind could spoil the whole batch. Thin slices were laid on wooden racks and exposed to steady wind and sun. No seasonings, no fancy smokehouses, just nature doing the drying. As the moisture evaporated, the fibers tightened, transforming the meat into durable strips that could be stored or carried for days without worry. Jerky's reliability came from what it lacked: no moisture, no fat, nothing soft enough for bacteria to cling to. What remained was concentrated protein, light to carry and powerful enough to fuel multi-day hunts, winter travel, and long-distance journeys. Today's store-bought jerky comes in plastic bags with expiration dates stamped in big letters. A year, maybe less. But traditional jerky was different. It could last season after season, sometimes outliving the person who made it. Tough, portable, nearly indestructible. Jerky was survival stripped to its smartest and simplest form. When winters were long and fresh, plants were nowhere to be found, dried berries were lifesavers. These weren't delicate snacks. They were nature's vitamin pills pressed into cakes so hard you practically needed a knife to break them. Chokecherries, cranberries, blueberries, all gathered in summer, crushed whole and shaped into dense blocks built to last. The process was simple but brilliant. Whole berries pits and all were mashed into a thick paste. That paste was spread onto bark or flat stones and left to dry under the sun. Over days, the moisture vanished and the mixture tightened into a solid cake that could shrug off time, humidity, and even insects. Once fully dried, the cakes were stored in tightly woven baskets or leather pouches tucked away like precious medicine for the cold months ahead. Why did they last so long? Natural acidity kept bacteria at bay, and the complete lack of moisture meant mold never stood a chance. But the real magic was in the nutrition. These cakes held on to their vitamins, especially vitamin C, long after other foods lost theirs. While sailors across the ocean collapsed from scurvy, native communities were fighting the same problem with choke cherry cakes made the previous summer. Hard as stone, sharp in flavor, and rich in life. These berry cakes weren't just food, they were survival concentrated into a single bite. Our final food might be the sweetest survival tool ever created: maple sugar bricks. Think of them as the energy candy of the northern forests. Small, solid, and packed with enough calories to keep hunters moving through freezing winds and deep snow. But what makes them truly remarkable is how long they last. These bricks could stay good for years, sometimes even across generations when kept dry. The process began in late winter when the sap started to rise. Families tapped sugar maples and collected the thin, watery sap in wooden containers. Then came the long boil. It took roughly 40 gallons of sap to make a single gallon of syrup, and even more heat to thicken that syrup into a solid brick. Hours of careful stirring transformed the clear liquid into a golden paste, then into a crystallized block, hard enough to store for years. Why did it survive so long? Because it contained almost no moisture. Sugar in that form is naturally hostile to bacteria, and once fully crystallized, it becomes nearly impossible to spoil. Hunters carried pieces of it the way modern athletes carry energy gels. One bite could warm the body and keep exhaustion at bay. And while modern sugar clumps and loses quality in just a few months, traditional maple sugar could survive entire generations. A sweet reminder that sometimes the simplest foods are the ones that last the longest. What we've just seen isn't just a list of old survival foods. It's a blueprint of indigenous genius. Every dried berry, every slab of pemmican, every kernel of corn was shaped by centuries of observation and a partnership with the land that ran far deeper than simple survival. These foods didn't just keep people alive, they helped communities thrive through brutal winters, long migrations, and seasons when nature gave nothing away for free. Modern life makes us think we need refrigerators, preservatives, and expiration dates to stay safe. But our ancestors proved something very different. They showed that with patience, skill, and respect for the world around them, you can build food that lasts longer than memory itself. They didn't have refrigerators, but they had something stronger, a profound understanding of nature.